I quietly transferred exactly $1.2 million out of my primary bank account and into a highly secure offshore trust. I did not leave a note. I did not send a warning text. I simply pressed submit on my secure laptop and walked into the kitchen to pour myself a fresh cup of espresso. Less than 4 hours later, the absolute silence of my Saturday morning was violently shattered. My teenage daughter stood on my front porch, pounding her clenched fists against the custom glass door until the heavy wood rattled in its frame. She was screaming at the top of her lungs that I had just ruined her entire life and destroyed her father. But as I watched her hyperventilate over a declined transaction notification glowing on her phone screen, she had no idea that I had just saved her from spending the next 20 years in a federal penitentiary. My name is Natalie, and I am 34 years old. I am the founder and chief executive officer of a top-tier crisis management public relations firm based in Austin, Texas. My entire career is built on anticipating disasters, neutralizing threats, and outsmarting highly manipulative people. I get paid a fortune to clean up catastrophic messes for massive corporations. So when my own blood relatives tried to orchestrate a blindside financial attack against me, they completely forgot what I do for a living. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit the like button and subscribe to this channel. If you have ever had to establish ruthless boundaries with toxic family members who believed they were entitled to everything you worked for, trust me, you will want to hear exactly how this confrontation played out. The heavy pounding on my front door grew louder and more frantic. I live in a highly secure gated community tucked away in the wealthy hills of Austin. It is the kind of pristine neighborhood where people value absolute discretion and quiet mornings above everything else. But Madison did not care if the neighbors were watching or listening. Today was her 18th birthday. Instead of celebrating with friends or opening presents, she was throwing a violent tantrum on my welcome mat. She slammed her palm against the glass panel one more time. "Open this door right now!" She screamed so loudly her voice cracked. Her face was flushed bright red with fury, and tears were streaming down her cheeks. She held her smartphone up to the glass window, pressing the screen against it so I could see the glaring red letters. It was a notification from our joint banking application. It read, "Transaction declined. Account frozen." I did not rush to unlock the door. I did not panic or shout back. I stood calmly in my foyer, holding my warm ceramic mug. I took a slow sip of my dark roast espresso, letting the bitter taste settle on my tongue. I watched her rage from the safety of my hallway, analyzing her body language exactly the way I analyze hostile corporate opponents. She looked so much like her father in that moment. The same entitled glare, the same reckless anger when things did not go exactly his way. Greg had abandoned us when I was just 16 and pregnant, leaving me to build my life from absolute zero. Over the past few months, he had suddenly slithered back into the life of Madison, playing the role of the cool, misunderstood entrepreneur father. I knew he was poison. "Are you deaf? Open the door, you psycho!" She shrieked again, kicking the base of the door frame with her expensive designer sneakers. I bought her those sneakers last month. I paid for her private school. I funded every luxury she had ever known. Yet here she was, ready to burn our relationship to the ground over a blocked wire transfer to a man who had never paid a single dime in child support. I finally set my coffee mug down on the marble console table. I adjusted my silk robe, unlocked the deadbolt, and pulled the heavy door open. The morning heat of the Texas sun immediately rushed into the air-conditioned foyer. Madison stumbled forward, almost falling into the house because she had been leaning so heavily against the wood. "Have you completely lost your mind?" she yelled, shoving her phone directly into my face. "Look at this. You locked me out of the account. You have no right to do that. It is my birthday. I am legally an adult today, and this is completely unfair." I stared directly into her angry eyes without blinking. "Yes, Madison. I intentionally locked it," I calmly replied. "I locked it to protect you from him. Protect me from him." Madison scoffed loudly, throwing her hands up in disbelief. "You are obsessed with making him the villain. He is my father and he is trying to build a legacy for our family. You just cannot stand that he is succeeding without you. I took a step forward, closing the heavy front door behind her, so my neighbors would not have to listen to this teenage meltdown. I pointed a steady finger at the phone clutched in her hand. A legacy, Madison. Is that what he called it when he convinced an 18-year-old girl to attempt a wire transfer of $1.2 million to a completely untraceable limited liability company? Madison crossed her arms over her chest. Her jaw was set in that stubborn angle she always used when she was losing an argument, but refused to back down. It is not untraceable, she snapped. It is a revolutionary Web3 tech startup. Dad and Uncle Terrence are closing their Series A funding round next month. They just needed temporary bridge funding to secure the server infrastructure. They offered me equity, Mom. I am not just a kid anymore. I am a founding partner in a company that is going to be worth billions. I laughed out loud at that. A harsh, bitter sound that echoed off the high ceilings of my foyer. A founding partner. I repeated the words slowly, letting the sheer absurdity of her statement hang in the air. Madison, I added you as an authorized user on my secondary account 3 months ago for one reason only, to help you build a solid credit score before you went off to college. I deposited exactly $50,000 into that account. It was a safety net for your future. I paused, taking another sip of my espresso before dropping the reality check she desperately needed. But you did not just try to move your $50,000, did you? Madison looked away, her eyes darting toward the floor. You dug into the banking portal. I continued, my voice dropping to a dangerously quiet tone. You bypassed the secondary restrictions and attempted to sweep my primary savings account. You tried to wire $1.2 million of my money, the money I earned working 80-hour weeks, while your father played golf to a shell company registered in Delaware just 3 weeks ago. I am an investor, she yelled defensively, stomping her foot. Dad said you would react exactly like this. He said you are trapped in a corporate mindset, and you do not understand decentralized finance. He said the bridge loan would be paid back in 48 hours with 20% interest. You are actually costing me money by freezing this transaction. I shook my head in amazement at the level of brainwashing Greg had managed to pull off in such a short amount of time. Greg never held a real job in his entire life. His sudden transformation into a tech visionary was a pathetic scam. And Terrence was worse. My sister Rebecca married Terrence 5 years ago, and the man was a walking financial disaster who spoke exclusively in crypto buzzwords to mask the fact that he was drowning in massive debt. And you believed him? I asked, keeping my voice perfectly level despite the anger boiling inside me. You genuinely believed that a legitimate tech startup on the verge of $1 billion valuation needed a teenage girl to wire them $1 million from her mother's personal savings account on a Saturday morning to survive. Madison opened her mouth to argue, but no words came out. For a split second, I saw a flicker of doubt in her eyes. The logical part of her brain, the part I had spent 18 years cultivating, was trying to break through the garbage her father had fed her, but her teenage pride was too strong. You do not understand anything about his business. She finally spat out, her voice dripping with venom. Uncle Terrence showed me the prospectus. They have angel investors lined up from Silicon Valley. They just needed liquidity. They trusted me to handle the bridge capital because I am an adult now. You are just jealous because Dad chose to include me in his success instead of you. You want to control me forever, but you cannot. I am 18. I have rights. I can do whatever I want with that account. I set my coffee mug down on the smooth marble console table and tightly crossed my arms across my chest. Actually, Madison, you do not have any rights to that specific money today or any other day, I replied very calmly. And you are about to find out exactly why right now. Madison let out a sharp, sarcastic laugh that sounded too much like her father. You think you can just snap your fingers and control my life forever? she sneered, stepping further into the foyer. Dad warned me you would pull something like this. He told me you would use your money to hold me hostage just like you do with your corporate clients. You are nothing but a soulless PR spin doctor. You do not care about family or loyalty. You only care about optics and control. I stood perfectly still, letting her words bounce off me. I had been called much worse by billionaire chief executive officers caught in embezzlement scandals. A teenager throwing a tantrum was not going to break my composure. You are so bitter. Madison continued, her voice rising in pitch as she paced across the marble floor. You have always been bitter because Dad left you. You hate that he realized he was trapped with a pregnant 16-year-old and had the courage to go out and find his true potential. He did not abandon us, Mom. He escaped you. He escaped your obsessive need to micromanage everything and everyone around you. And now that he is finally building an empire, now that he is about to be wildly successful and invited me to be part of it, you are trying to sabotage him because you cannot stand the thought of him winning without you. She paused, gasping for air, expecting me to yell back. She expected a mother-daughter screaming match. She expected me to defend my sacrifices, to cry about how hard it was to raise her alone while working night shifts and going to college online. She wanted me to give her a sad, emotional monologue so she could roll her eyes and storm out feeling victorious. I gave her absolutely nothing. Instead, I turned my back on her and walked over to the kitchen island. I picked up my silver iPad and tapped the screen, waking it up. Are you even listening to me? Madison shrieked, her frustration boiling over as she followed me into the kitchen. I am telling you that I am done playing your games. I am an adult. Dad respects me as a business partner. Uncle Terrence respects me. You are the only one who still treats me like a stupid child. I did not look up from the screen. I swiped my finger across the glass opening an encrypted application that my security team uses for high-level corporate espionage investigations. I typed in my complex alphanumeric password and hit enter. The screen flashed green, indicating a secure connection to my private server. You are ignoring me just like you always do when you know you are wrong, Madison yelled, slamming her hand flat against the granite countertop. Unfreeze the account, Mom. Dad is waiting for the wire transfer. The development team in California needs the server space paid for by noon today, or the entire launch is delayed. If you ruin this for him, I will never forgive you. I will move out today, and I will never speak to you again. I continued scrolling through the files on my iPad, my face completely devoid of emotion. I opened a specific folder labeled Operation House of Cards. Inside were dozens of digitized documents, bank statements, audio recordings, and police reports. I selected the first file and dragged it onto the mirroring application connecting my iPad to the large smart television mounted on the living room wall. Mom! Madison screamed one final time, her voice cracking with absolute desperation. Do you even care that you are destroying my relationship with my father? I finally lifted my eyes from the glowing screen and looked at her. Her chest was heaving, her face was red, and her hands were shaking. She had fired every piece of emotional ammunition Greg had given her, and none of it had left a single scratch on my armor. I felt a brief pang of pity for her. She was so young, so naive, and so unaware of the monster she was trying to defend. I tapped the volume icon on my iPad, turning it all the way up. Are you finished, Madison? I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. Have you recited all the lines Greg told you to memorize? She blinked, taken aback by my chilling tone. What are you talking about? I walked around the kitchen island, closing the distance between us, until I was standing just a few feet away from her. I looked her dead in the eye. I am not a soulless spin doctor, I replied evenly. I am a highly trained crisis manager, and you are currently standing in the middle of a massive federal crisis. I watched the color completely drain from Madison's face. Her shoulders slumped forward, and the defiant posture she had carried through the front door vanished in an instant. A federal crisis. She repeated the words slowly, as if they were a foreign language she could not translate. What are you talking about? I placed my silver iPad flat on the smooth surface of the kitchen island. I did not raise my voice. I did not gloat. I simply delivered the truth with the precision of a surgeon. I did not freeze the account because I am a bitter ex-Madison. I froze it because I just saved you from a 20-year federal prison sentence for wire fraud. Madison took a physical step backward. Her expensive designer sneakers squeaked loudly against the polished hardwood floor. "That is a lie," she stammered, shaking her head rapidly. "Dad said it was a standard bridge loan. He said you just had to sign a release form and the money would be legally transferred." I let out a heavy sigh, feeling the weight of my daughter's dangerous naivety. "Your father lied to you," I stated plainly. "There is no such thing as a standard bridge loan authorized by an 18-year-old girl using funds she does not legally own. When you tried to move $1.2 million out of my primary savings account this morning, you triggered a massive fraud alert. The banking system immediately flagged the transaction. If I had not intervened and locked the account myself, the bank would have automatically reported the attempted transfer to the Federal Bureau of Investigation." Madison crossed her arms tightly across her chest, shivering as if the air conditioning had suddenly dropped 10 degrees. "I am an authorized user," she argued, but her voice lacked the aggressive venom from earlier. It sounded small and terrified. "You are an authorized user on a secondary credit building account containing $50,000. I corrected her. "You are not a signatory on my primary wealth management portfolio. By attempting to bypass the security firewalls and sweep the primary funds into an unregistered limited liability company out of state, you committed a federal offense. Wire fraud over $1 million carries a mandatory minimum sentence in federal court. And who do you think the authorities would arrest? Your father, who requested the money over a secure encrypted messaging application with disappearing texts? Or you, the legal adult, who actually pressed the button and initiated the illegal transfer?" The harsh reality of my words finally slammed into her. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. She looked down at her hands, as if she suddenly realized they were covered in invisible handcuffs. "He told me it was safe." She whispered, a single tear escaping her right eye and cutting a path through her carefully applied makeup. "He promised me he had his corporate lawyers look over the paperwork. He said I was just acting as a temporary fiduciary for the startup." I stepped closer to her, softening my expression just a fraction. "A temporary fiduciary is just a fancy legal term for a fall guy, Madison," I explained, keeping my tone steady and educational. "He used your 18th birthday as a weapon. He waited until today because today you are legally responsible for your own actions. If the transfer had gone through and the authorities had tracked the money, he would have claimed ignorance. He would have let you take the fall while he disappeared with my life savings. He is using you as a human shield." Madison squeezed her eyes shut, crying silently. She was finally starting to understand the terrifying scope of the manipulation. The father she had idolized, the man who had promised her an empire, had actually handed her a live grenade and pulled the pin. "Mom, I did not know." She choked out, her voice trembling with genuine fear. "I swear I did not know it was illegal. I just wanted him to be proud of me. I wanted to be part of something big." Before I could respond to her apology, a low hum vibrated through the quiet morning air. A shadow fell across the frosted glass of the front door. We both turned our heads toward the window, just as a sleek black Tesla Model S sped up my long, winding driveway and slammed to a sudden halt near the front porch. The tires screeched sharply against the expensive paving stones. I recognized the obnoxious custom license plate immediately. The parasites had arrived. I knew exactly who was sitting inside that tinted luxury vehicle. Greg and his desperate accomplices were here to personally secure the stolen funds. They thought they had cornered a helpless woman. They were entirely dead wrong. Before I could even blink, 4 car doors slammed shut in unison. Heavy footsteps marched up the front steps, and without bothering to knock, the front door swung open again. Greg walked into my foyer looking like he had just stepped out of a magazine spread for successful tech entrepreneurs. He wore a fitted navy blazer over a crisp white shirt and expensive designer jeans. His hair was perfectly styled to look effortlessly messy. Right behind him was my younger sister, Rebecca, wearing an oversized pair of dark sunglasses and a smug expression. Trailing behind her was her husband, Terrence, looking equally arrogant in a flashy tailored suit that I knew for a fact he could not afford. The moment Greg saw Madison standing in the kitchen, he immediately switched into his concerned father persona. He rushed past me, completely ignoring my presence, and wrapped his arms around her. Madison collapsed into his embrace, sobbing onto his expensive blazer. "It is okay, sweetheart," Greg murmured loudly enough for me to hear. "I am here now. I told you your mother would try to pull a stunt like this. She simply cannot handle seeing us build something meaningful together." He pulled back and placed both hands on her shoulders, looking at her with practiced sympathy. "You did everything perfectly today, Madison. You acted like a true adult and a visionary business partner. This is not your fault. It is just your mother letting her past trauma interfere with your bright future." Then he finally turned his gaze to me. His face shifted from loving father to condescending businessman. He let out a long, dramatic sigh, as if dealing with me was the most exhausting burden in the world. "Natalie, you need to stop this childish tantrum right now," he said, his voice dripping with fake patience. "You are embarrassing yourself, and you are traumatizing our daughter on her 18th birthday." I crossed my arms and stared at him. "Traumatizing her." I repeated, my voice flat. "You tried to make her commit a federal crime, Greg. You used her social security number and her birthday to orchestrate a fraudulent wire transfer." Greg let out a dismissive laugh and shook his head. He looked over his shoulder at Rebecca and Terrence as if inviting them to share in the joke. "Listen to yourself, Natalie," he scoffed. "You have spent too many years writing paranoid press releases for corrupt politicians. You are seeing conspiracies where there is only innovation. I am not stealing anything. I am giving our daughter a ground floor equity stake in a decentralized Web3 platform that will revolutionize digital logistics. I am trying to teach her how to build generational wealth, something you know absolutely nothing about because you just hoard your money in boring traditional bank accounts. I just needed a temporary bridge loan to secure our server architecture. It is standard industry practice." Terrence nodded vigorously in agreement, stepping forward to stand next to Greg. "That is right," Terrence chimed in, adjusting his expensive watch. "The liquidity pools are waiting on this capital deployment." Greg held up a hand to stop Terrence from speaking further. Greg wanted to deliver the final blow himself. He reached into his blazer pocket and pulled out his smartphone, tapping the screen with sharp, aggressive movements. "Here is how this is going to work, Natalie." Greg stated, his tone dropping the fake warmth and becoming cold and threatening. "I have my corporate attorneys on standby right now. They have already drafted the emergency injunction. You are illegally withholding funds from a legal adult who is a registered authorized user on that account. You are committing financial abuse against our daughter. I will give you exactly 10 minutes to grab your purse, get in your car, and drive down to the local branch with us. You are going to sit in front of the branch manager, and you are going to personally authorize the release of those funds to my company account. If you refuse to do this, I will call my lawyers, and we will file a massive lawsuit against you before lunch. I will drag you and your precious public relations firm through the mud. I will tell every single media outlet in Texas that you are financially abusing your own teenage daughter out of pure spite and jealousy. You will lose your business, your reputation, and every single client you have. The choice is yours, Natalie. You can either be the supportive mother who helps her child succeed in the modern tech world, or you can be the bitter villain who destroys her own family out of sheer spite. Make your decision right now, because my legal team is waiting for my phone call. Do not test me on this." I stared at Greg without blinking. His empty threat hung in the quiet air of my foyer. He actually believed his aggressive corporate posturing would intimidate me. Before I could respond to his ridiculous ultimatum, Terrence stepped forward, adjusting the cuffs of his overly tailored suit. He flashed a condescending smile, clearly believing that Greg had effectively terrified me into submission, and now it was his turn to play the calm, reasonable tech genius. Listen, Natalie. Terrence began, his voice dripping with forced patience, as if he were explaining basic math to a toddler. I know you are feeling defensive right now, but you have to look at the bigger picture. We are not talking about some traditional brick-and-mortar business here. We are deploying a decentralized blockchain infrastructure. We are tokenizing logistics assets across multiple nodes. You are panicking because you do not understand the underlying architecture of what we are building. I crossed my arms and tilted my head slightly. I rested my right hand over my left wrist, casually tapping the sleek screen of my smartwatch. With two subtle swipes, I activated the encrypted voice recording application. A tiny green microphone icon appeared on the watch face, confirming that every single word echoing through my hallway was now being captured and uploaded to my secure cloud server. Go on, Terrence, I said softly. Please explain the underlying architecture to me. Terrence puffed out his chest, clearly thrilled to have an audience. The bridge capital Madison tried to provide is essential for our liquidity pools. He continued, pacing slightly as he waved his hands around. We are currently navigating a highly competitive seed round. The venture capitalists we are speaking with in Silicon Valley demand proof of concept and immediate server deployment. If we do not secure the nodes by the end of the weekend, the smart contracts fail, and we lose our competitive advantage in the Web3 space. We are talking about an exponential return on investment, but it requires agile financial movements. He paused to check his reflection in the hallway mirror before turning back to me with a sneer. I get it, Natalie. You are a public relations person. You spend your days writing apology letters for canceled celebrities and drafting boring press releases. You manage optics. But this is high-level decentralized finance. This is not about managing a narrative. This is about algorithmic scaling. You cannot just put a positive spin on a frozen blockchain protocol. You are completely out of your depth here. I kept my expression completely blank, letting him dig his grave deeper and deeper with every ridiculous buzzword he threw out. His confidence was staggering, considering he was wearing a suit he bought on credit to pitch a fake company that had zero actual product. So just to be clear, Terrence, I asked, keeping my voice light and inquisitive. You needed my 18-year-old daughter to bypass my banking security protocols to fund your liquidity pools because your Silicon Valley investors cannot wait until Monday. Exactly. Terrence smiled, nodding eagerly. He was so caught up in his own ego that he did not realize I was systematically locking him into a verifiable recorded confession. Traditional banks are dinosaurs, Natalie. They operate on archaic schedules. We operate on the blockchain. It never sleeps. Madison understands this because she has a modern mindset. She is an early adopter. We offered her an exclusive equity position because she had the vision to provide the bridge capital when the traditional funding windows were closed. You freezing that transfer is basically corporate sabotage. You are actively destroying her portfolio before it even gets off the ground. Rebecca let out a loud, dramatic sigh from the doorway and crossed her arms. You see, Natalie, she chimed in, her voice echoing her husband's arrogance. Terrence is a financial visionary. You are just embarrassed because you do not understand anything he just said. You have always been so jealous of anyone who is smarter than you. Just go to the bank and release the money so we can all move on with our lives and build our legacy. I looked down at my smartwatch, verifying that the recording was still running perfectly. Terrence had just stated on the record that he and Greg had promised a guaranteed return on investment to a teenager in exchange for an unauthorized wire transfer from an account she did not own. He had legally defined their actions as an unregistered securities offering disguised as a bridge loan. He had basically wrapped his own federal indictment in a neat little bow and handed it directly to me. His arrogance was truly astonishing. I smiled. His pathetic attempt to insult my intelligence would soon cost him absolutely everything he had. Rebecca pushed her oversized designer sunglasses up into her perfectly highlighted blonde hair and took an aggressive step forward, placing a fiercely protective hand on Terrence's tailored arm. She glared at me with the exact same expression of utter disappointment our mother used whenever I failed to meet her impossible expectations. You just cannot help yourself, can you, Natalie? She snapped, her voice shrill and grating in the quiet space of my foyer. You always have to be the smartest person in the room. You always have to ruin every single family milestone because you are so deeply miserable inside. She gestured wildly around my pristine, brightly lit entryway. Look at this magnificent house. Look at all this excessive wealth you hoard for yourself, while the rest of us are actually trying to build something meaningful and lasting. You could have effortlessly written a check for Madison today and barely noticed the money was gone. But no, you had to turn her highly anticipated 18th birthday into another one of your dramatic power trips. Just like you completely ruined my perfect wedding day when you stubbornly refused to pay for the upgraded floral arrangements. You are physically incapable of simply being happy for anyone else in this room. I remained completely silent and perfectly still, letting her continuously vent her incredibly toxic entitlement. My absolute silence only seemed to fuel her burning rage further. Terrence is a brilliant financial mind, Rebecca continued, her loud voice echoing off the high custom ceilings. Greg is generously giving your daughter the investment opportunity of an absolute lifetime. And instead of openly supporting them, you maliciously freeze your bank accounts and treat them like common criminals. This is exactly why you have always been the ultimate black sheep of this entire family. You have zero family loyalty. When Terrence and I desperately needed a substantial down payment for our beautiful new house last year, you cruelly slammed the heavy door in our faces. You falsely claimed you were merely protecting your hard-earned assets. But we all thoroughly know the real truth. You are just a selfish, cold-hearted businesswoman who deeply cares infinitely more about her prestigious public relations firm than her own flesh and blood. You honestly think that just because you struggled alone when you were a foolish, pregnant teenager, everyone else magically has to suffer too. You constantly use your money as a cruel weapon to forcefully control people, and when they bravely refuse to bow down to your demands, you actively try to destroy them. Rebecca crossed her arms, a triumphant smirk spreading across her face as she prepared to deliver what she believed was the ultimate emotional blow. This is exactly why Mom and Dad completely cut you off, she sneered, leaning in closer. They finally saw you for what you really are. They realized that you would rather sit alone in this giant empty house than help your own sister establish a comfortable life. Dad told me last week that he does not even consider you his daughter anymore. He said you are nothing but a massive disappointment. They are so proud of me and Terrence for taking risks and building a real portfolio. They are thrilled that Greg is stepping up to be the father Madison actually deserves. You are completely isolated, Natalie. Nobody in this family supports you. Nobody is on your side. Even your own daughter realizes how toxic you are. You have successfully alienated every single person who ever loved you all because you are too cheap and too arrogant to share a tiny fraction of your ridiculous wealth. Madison looked down at the floor, uncomfortable with the sheer venom pouring out of her aunt. I simply looked at Rebecca, feeling absolutely nothing but a deep, profound sense of relief. For years, I had agonized over the rejection of my parents. I had spent countless hours in therapy trying to understand why I was never good enough, why Rebecca was always the golden child despite her constant failures and endless demands for bailouts. But standing here today, listening to her openly admit that our parents disowned me simply because I refused to be their personal, automated teller machine, the final chain broke. Their rejection was not a punishment. It was my absolute salvation. Are you quite finished, Rebecca? I asked, my voice as calm and smooth as glass. Because while your tragic victim narrative is highly entertaining, it does not change the fact that the bank account remains firmly locked. Greg suddenly shoved his way past Rebecca, his face turning a dangerous shade of crimson. He had completely lost his thin patience with the unnecessary family drama and was now entirely ready to forcefully take back full control of the current narrative today. Enough of this completely pointless psychological warfare, Greg barked, taking a heavy step forward until he was standing just inches away from my kitchen island. He reached inside the breast pocket of his tailored navy blazer and violently yanked out a thick, folded stack of legal papers. He slammed them down onto the polished granite surface with so much aggressive force that my ceramic espresso mug visibly rattled. I am not here to listen to your pathetic family therapy session, and I am certainly not leaving this house without the capital that legally belongs to my company. You can try to manipulate Madison with your terrifying horror stories about federal prison, but I am not an impressionable teenager. I know exactly what you are doing, and I am putting a stop to it right now. He aggressively pointed a rigid finger at the thick stack of printed documents. That is a fully drafted emergency injunction prepared by one of the most ruthless corporate litigation firms in the state of Texas. It outlines extremely specific charges of financial abuse and illegal asset withholding against an adult dependent. Madison turned 18 today, which means she possesses the absolute legal right to freely transfer funds from any bank account bearing her authorized signature. By intentionally freezing that transaction using your administrative privileges, you are actively committing a severe civil rights violation. My legal team is highly prepared to drag you into a highly publicized courtroom battle that will make you look like a controlling, unstable tyrant who financially abuses her own child. I glanced down at the papers without making a single move to actually pick them up. Greg leaned forward, placing both of his hands flat on the countertop to loom over me. You pride yourself on being the ultimate crisis manager, Natalie. You built your entire precious public relations firm on the foundational idea of perfectly managing public perception and protecting high-profile reputations. But what happens when the brilliant crisis manager suddenly becomes the devastating crisis? How exactly do you think your massive Fortune 500 clients will react when they wake up tomorrow morning and read the front-page headlines? Local public relations executive sued by 18-year-old daughter for financial abuse and theft. They will drop your agency so fast, your head will spin. Your entire carefully constructed corporate empire will crumble to the ground in less than a week. He checked his expensive watch, tapping the glass face with his index finger. I am giving you exactly 10 minutes to resolve this situation peacefully. 10 minutes to walk over to your laptop, log back into the banking portal, and permanently remove the administrative block on the outgoing wire transfer. If you stubbornly refuse to authorize the release of those funds to my development team, by the time that clock runs out, I am making one quick phone call. My lawyers will instantly file this injunction with the county clerk, and they will simultaneously leak the entire explosive story to my personal contacts at 3 different major news outlets. You will be utterly destroyed both financially and professionally. You will lose everything you have spent the last 18 years desperately trying to build just to prove a petty point. Madison watched her father with wide, terrified eyes, clearly overwhelmed by the sudden escalation of the conflict. "Dad, please do not destroy her business," she whispered, her voice trembling with genuine panic. "We just need the money for the servers, right? We do not need to ruin her life." Greg did not even bother to look back at her when he responded. He kept his cold, dead eyes locked entirely on my face. "She is bringing this destruction onto herself, Madison," he stated coldly. "I am simply holding her accountable for her extremely toxic behavior. Sometimes you have to burn down the old corrupt systems to build something new and pure. This is a vital lesson in corporate leverage. Your mother only responds to overwhelming force." I stared at the supposed legal documents resting on my granite countertop. I could immediately tell just by glancing at the formatting that they were completely fake. The font was wrong, and the legal jargon was a chaotic mess of meaningless buzzwords copied directly from a basic internet search. Greg was pulling a massive bluff. He was desperately playing a high-stakes game of poker with a completely empty hand, hoping my fear of public embarrassment would force me to fold. He fundamentally misunderstood who he was dealing with. "I do not fear negative press. I manufacture and manipulate it for a living. You have 9 minutes left, Natalie." He suddenly growled, his face twisting into an ugly sneer. Make the smart choice for once in your miserable life and pay me. Instead of arguing with him, I simply smiled. It was not a defensive smile or a nervous habit. It was a genuine, deeply satisfied smile. I turned my back on his red, sweating face and walked gracefully past him toward the sleek, stainless steel wine fridge built into my custom kitchen cabinetry. The heavy silence in the room was palpable. I could feel the confusion radiating from Greg, Terrence, and Rebecca. They had fully expected a screaming match. They had anticipated tears begging or perhaps a frantic phone call to my own legal team. By completely ignoring his aggressive 9-minute countdown, I had instantly shattered their carefully rehearsed illusion of control. I grasped the polished handle of the wine fridge and pulled it open, letting the cool temperature-controlled air wash over my hands. I reached inside and selected a bottle of expensive vintage Cabernet Sauvignon. I retrieved a crystal wine glass from the upper cabinet and uncorked the bottle with smooth, practiced movements. The rich, dark red liquid poured into the glass with a soft, rhythmic sound that echoed loudly in the tense quiet of the house. I took my time. I let them stand there awkwardly in my foyer, shifting their weight and exchanging nervous glances. Terrence cleared his throat, clearly uncomfortable with the sudden shift in dynamics. Rebecca crossed her arms tighter, her smug expression slowly melting into a look of deep uncertainty. Greg stood rigidly by the granite countertop, his fake legal documents still resting uselessly next to my espresso mug. He glared at me, his jaw clenched so tightly I could almost hear his teeth grinding together. He wanted to shout again, but he was completely paralyzed by my absolute lack of fear. I picked up my wine glass and took a slow, appreciative sip, letting the complex flavors linger on my palate. Then I turned around to face them. I gestured toward the spacious sunken living room just a few steps down from the kitchen. The brilliant morning sunlight was streaming beautifully through the massive floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating the expensive modern furniture and highlighting the fine dust motes dancing in the silent air. "Why do we not make ourselves comfortable?" I suggested, my voice smooth and perfectly polite, carrying absolutely no trace of fear. "Since we are apparently going to spend the next few minutes discussing high-level legal strategy and emergency injunctions, we might as well sit down and be civilized." Nobody moved for a long, agonizing moment. They were entirely unsure how to appropriately react to my terrifyingly calm demeanor. Madison was the first to finally break the frozen tableau. She slowly walked down the short flight of stairs and sank onto the edge of the plush gray sofa, looking physically exhausted and entirely overwhelmed by the situation. Seeing her move naturally prompted the others to cautiously follow. Rebecca walked over and sat stiffly next to Madison, keeping her expensive designer handbag tightly clutched in her lap like a protective physical shield. Terrence nervously chose a leather accent chair, leaning forward, with his elbows resting heavily on his knees, trying desperately to maintain his fragile posture of a highly confident tech business executive. Greg was the very last to move. He snatched his fabricated legal documents off the kitchen island and marched heavily into the living room, refusing to sit down. He paced back and forth across the expensive Persian rug, gripping the papers so tightly his knuckles turned completely white. I followed them, walking slowly and purposefully, enjoying every single second of their rapidly mounting anxiety. I did not sit on the sofa. Instead, I took my place in the large, high-backed velvet armchair that directly faced the entire group. It was a subtle psychological tactic establishing my position of absolute authority in the room. I took another small sip of my Cabernet and rested the crystal glass on the polished oak coffee table. I looked directly at Greg, who had stopped pacing and was now glaring at me intensely. He was waiting for me to surrender. He was waiting for me to pull out my phone and transfer his money. I folded my hands comfortably in my lap. "Okay, Greg," I said, my tone perfectly even and conversational. "Let us talk about the law. Let us thoroughly discuss your extremely aggressive emergency injunction and the heavy legal consequences of withholding funds. But before we dive into your imaginary civil rights violations, let us talk about the $500,000 promissory note you signed with a cartel-backed loan shark last Tuesday. using Madison and her stolen social security number. The sheer terror that instantly flooded his widened eyes told me everything I needed to know. The trap was sprung and he was completely caught now. Greg froze entirely. The artificial color he maintained through expensive tanning treatments seemed to instantly drain from his face, leaving him looking pale and suddenly very old. The fake legal documents he had been aggressively brandishing just moments earlier slipped from his suddenly numb fingers and scattered carelessly across the expensive Persian rug. He opened his mouth to speak to deny the devastating accusation, or to spin another web of lies, but his vocal cords completely failed him. He just stood there staring at me with wide, terrified eyes, as the absolute reality of his situation crashed down upon him. I did not give him a single second to recover his balance or attempt to rewrite the narrative. I reached down beside the velvet armchair and picked up a thick, heavy manila folder that I had prepared the night before. I tossed it onto the polished oak coffee table with a loud, decisive slap. "Go ahead and open it, Greg. Open it." I offered, my voice dangerously calm and inviting. Or perhaps Terrence would like to do the honors since he is the brilliant financial visionary of this dynamic duo. Take a good long look at exactly what happens when you attempt to orchestrate a massive financial crime against a woman who literally specializes in corporate espionage and threat neutralization for a living. Did you honestly believe that I just sit in a fancy office writing polite apology letters all day? I am the chief executive officer of a top-tier crisis management firm. When a Fortune 500 company discovers millions of dollars missing from their accounts, they do not call the local police first. They call me. I have an entire department of elite private investigators and ruthless forensic accountants on my permanent payroll. These are former federal agents who track hidden offshore assets for sport. When Madison casually mentioned your revolutionary tech startup last month, my team quietly went to work. Ooh. Terrence shifted uncomfortably in his leather chair, actively avoiding my gaze, while staring nervously at the thick folder resting on the table. Rebecca leaned forward, her earlier arrogant smirk completely replaced by a look of deep, fearful confusion. "What is she talking about, Greg?" Rebecca demanded, her voice rising in panic. "Tell her she is lying. Tell her about the angel investors in Silicon Valley." Greg could not even look at his sister-in-law. He kept his eyes glued to the floor, his chest heaving as he struggled to process the devastating collapse of his carefully constructed illusion. I did not wait for his pathetic response. I simply continued laying out the brutal, verifiable facts. "My team dug into your supposedly groundbreaking Web3 logistics company, Greg," I stated clearly, ensuring every single word resonated in the quiet room. "Do you want to know what they found?" "They found absolutely nothing. There is no revolutionary blockchain architecture. There are no liquidity pools, and there is certainly no highly competitive seed round. Your billion-dollar tech empire is nothing but a registered shell company tied to a single post office box in Delaware. You have zero actual employees. You hold exactly zero patents. You do not even own a basic functioning website. The entire enterprise is a complete ghost." Madison gasped loudly, covering her mouth with both hands as she looked back and forth between me and her father. "Dad, tell me that is not true," she pleaded, her voice breaking into a terrified sob. "Tell me you did not just use me for a fake company." Greg finally managed to find his voice, but it was weak and desperate. "You do not understand business, Natalie," he stammered frantically, wiping a line of cold sweat from his forehead. "We are in the stealth phase. We are operating quietly to fiercely protect our intellectual property from aggressive industry competitors. It is a standard operational procedure for disruptive technology startups." I let out a sharp, genuine laugh that cut through his ridiculous lies like a freshly sharpened knife. "Stealth phase," I repeated mockingly, shaking my head at his sheer audacity. "You are not operating in stealth, Greg. You are operating a highly illegal Ponzi scheme funded entirely by extremely dangerous people who do not care about your imaginary intellectual property. My forensic accountants tracked every single dollar you have touched over the past 6 months. You have not invested a single dime into any kind of technological development. You have been frantically using stolen funds to pay off a massive mountain of personal debt to a very violent organized crime syndicate. And when those people finally demanded their $500,000 back with crippling interest, you realized you were entirely out of time. So you decided to completely destroy your own teenage daughter's life just to save your pathetic skin. Terrence abruptly stood up from the leather accent chair, his expensive suit suddenly looking 3 sizes too big for his shrinking posture. He held both of his hands up in a defensive gesture, backing away from Greg, as if the man had suddenly caught a highly contagious disease. "Natalie, wait a minute," Terrence stammered, his voice pitching up an entire octave. "You have to believe me when I tell you that I had absolutely no idea about any cartel money or any illegal loans. I am strictly the technical advisor for the decentralized logistics infrastructure. I handle the blockchain architecture and the tokenomics. Greg handles all the fiat currency fundraising and the traditional banking side of the operation. He told me he was securing standard bridge capital from a legitimate institutional lender. I am completely innocent in this specific financial matter." I slowly turned my head to look at Terrence, letting a cold, empty silence stretch out between us before I finally responded, "Innocent." I repeated the word as if tasting something incredibly sour. That is a very interesting choice of vocabulary for a man who has spent the last 5 years aggressively positioning himself as a billionaire crypto visionary. I reached back into the thick manila folder resting on the coffee table and pulled out a second stack of documents. These pages were securely fastened together with a heavy metal clip. I tossed them casually onto the glass surface, right next to the evidence of Greg and his criminal conspiracy. "Do not attempt to insult my intelligence by playing the clueless technical advisor, Terrence," I said, my voice dropping to a low, dangerous register. "You do not know the first thing about blockchain architecture or decentralized finance. My forensic accountants ran a deep background check on your precious cryptocurrency trading history. Would you like to guess what they actually found behind all those complex digital wallets and encrypted offshore accounts?" Terrence swallowed hard, visibly sweating now, but he remained completely silent. "They found that you are nothing but a degenerate gambler," I stated flatly, watching the color drain from his face just as rapidly as it had drained from Greg's face a moment ago. "You are not a misunderstood financial genius, Terrence. You are a desperate addict with a severe gambling problem." I leaned forward in my velvet armchair, pointing directly at the clipped stack of papers. "Those documents are verified transaction logs from 3 different illegal offshore sports betting platforms and 2 high-stakes underground casinos located in Macau. You did not lose your initial startup seed money in a sudden, unexpected crypto market crash. You did not suffer a tragic loss due to algorithmic trading errors. You intentionally wired every single dollar of your early operational capital directly to overseas gambling syndicates." I watched him flinch with every word I spoke as if I were physically striking him. "You spent the last 18 months frantically chasing your massive losses." I continued, relentlessly pulling apart his entire fake identity piece by piece. "You bet on foreign soccer matches, you played high-stakes baccarat, and you funneled thousands of dollars every week into unregulated digital slot machines. When you inevitably lost all of the money you had successfully convinced your gullible early investors to give you, you panicked. You desperately needed a massive influx of fresh cash to hide your devastating losses and keep the illusion alive. That is exactly why you eagerly partnered with Greg for this fake tech startup scam. You both needed a massive payday to save yourselves from the severe consequences of your own pathetic actions." Terrence opened his mouth to deny the accusations, but he was completely paralyzed by the overwhelming weight of the irrefutable evidence sitting right in front of him. "You used all of those flashy tech buzzwords to distract everyone around you," I said, shaking my head in absolute disgust. "You thought that if you threw around terms like liquidity pools and node deployment, nobody would bother to actually look at the underlying bank statements. You thought you could easily con my 18-year-old daughter because she trusted her family. But you made a fatal miscalculation, Terrence. You forgot that I track digital footprints for a living. I can see exactly where every single penny went, and I can mathematically prove that you never bought a single server or wrote a single line of code. Terrence slowly sank back into the leather chair, his confident posture completely shattered. He looked frantically toward his wife, seeking any sign of support or rescue. But Rebecca was not looking at him with sympathy. She was staring directly at the casino transaction logs, her eyes wide with pure, unadulterated fury. The protective bubble of arrogance around him was permanently destroyed, leaving him completely exposed. Rebecca did not blink as she stared at the thick stack of casino transaction logs scattered across the polished oak coffee table. Her perfectly manicured hands began to tremble violently. The smug, arrogant expression she had worn since she marched through my front door had completely vanished, replaced by a look of profound horror. I watched her carefully, knowing exactly how much pride she had wrapped up in her marriage. For years, she had relentlessly bragged to anyone who would listen about her brilliant husband and his incredible investments. She had mocked my career choices and ridiculed my independence, always pointing to her own life as the ultimate standard of success. Now that carefully constructed facade was collapsing right in front of her eyes. I reached into the heavy manila folder one last time and pulled out a sleek black binder. I leaned forward and gently slid it across the glass surface until it rested right at her fingertips. "Go ahead and open it, Rebecca," I said, my voice softer now, but no less devastating. "You have spent the last 3 years telling our parents and all of our mutual friends about the highly exclusive luxury real estate portfolio you and Terrence were building together. You bragged about the commercial properties downtown and the beautiful vacation rentals you were supposedly acquiring in Florida. You even mocked me for simply putting my money into mutual funds, calling me too fearful to play in the big leagues." Rebecca slowly reached out and flipped open the heavy black cover. Inside were dozens of bank statements, joint account ledgers, and wire transfer receipts. Her eyes darted rapidly across the pages, desperately searching for the properties she thought she owned. Terrence suddenly lunged forward, reaching for the binder in a frantic attempt to shut it. "Do not look at those," he pleaded, his voice cracking with sheer panic. "Rebecca, please listen to me. I can explain everything. I just needed a little more time to recover. The market dipped, and I had to leverage our assets." "Do not touch me," Rebecca screamed, slapping his hand away with so much force that the sharp sound echoed through the entire living room. She grabbed the binder and pulled it tightly against her chest as she continued scanning the documents. Her face turned chalk white as the brutal reality of her financial situation finally registered in her brain. There were no commercial properties downtown. There were no vacation rentals in Florida. Every single dollar from their joint savings account, every cent from her personal inheritance, and every dime from the home equity loan they had taken out on their primary residence had been systematically drained. "Where is it?" she whispered, looking up at Terrence with wild, terrified eyes. "Where is my money, Terrence? Where is the $500,000 we put into the escrow account last month?" Terrence physically shrank back into his leather chair, looking like a cornered animal. "It is coming back," he stammered, sweating profusely. "Greg and I had a foolproof plan. The bridge loan from Madison was going to cover the immediate debt, and then we were going to hit a massive return on the crypto nodes. We were going to double everything and put it right back before you even noticed it was gone." Rebecca let out a guttural scream of pure, agonizing betrayal. She threw the heavy black binder directly at his chest, scattering the bank statements all over him and the floor. "You stole from me!" she shrieked, her voice completely hoarse. "You gambled away our entire life savings. You mortgaged our house to pay off your pathetic underground casino debts. You lied to me every single day for years." She jumped up from the sofa and stood over him, her fists clenched at her sides. "You are nothing but a worthless, lying thief. I defended you to my family. I cut off my own sister because you convinced me she was trying to ruin us, and all this time you were the one destroying everything." The toxic family alliance had officially shattered into a million irreparable pieces. Rebecca turned her blinding rage toward Greg, who was still standing frozen near the kitchen. "And you!" she yelled, pointing a shaking finger at her brother-in-law. You knew about this. You knew he was broke, and you still dragged him into this fake tech company scam just to save your own skin. You used my husband to help you steal from an 18-year-old girl. You are both absolute monsters. Greg tried to take a step back, raising his hands defensively. Keep me out of your marital problems, Rebecca, he snapped, trying to regain some fraction of his former authority. This was a business strategy that went completely sideways. A business strategy that went completely sideways. I repeated his pathetic excuse, echoing the hollow phrase back to him in the tense living room. You are truly unbelievable, Greg. You stand there and try to deflect the blame onto Terrence as if you are some kind of innocent bystander whose brilliant corporate vision was tragically ruined by a bad partnership. I turned my attention away from my hysterical sister and her crumbling marriage. They were merely the collateral damage in this terrifying scenario. The real target. The ultimate victim of this entire elaborate scam was sitting right next to Rebecca on the gray sofa. I looked directly at Madison, who was watching her father with a mixture of profound shock and growing disgust. I picked up my silver iPad and tapped the glossy screen once, sending a direct wireless signal to the massive 85-inch smart television mounted on the wall above the marble fireplace. The dark screen instantly flared to life, casting a bright white glow across the entire room. I had preloaded a specific document for this exact moment. It was not a bank statement or a casino ledger. It was a comprehensive, deeply detailed credit report. I waited for a few seconds, letting everyone in the room focus their attention on the glowing text illuminated on the high-definition screen. Do you know what that is, Greg? I asked, my voice echoing loudly in the quiet space. Madison squinted at the television, her brow furrowing in deep confusion as she tried to read the small text from the sofa. Mom, why is my name at the top of that screen? She asked, her voice trembling slightly. Why does it show a credit history extending back almost a full year? I looked at my daughter, feeling a sharp pang of protective anger toward the man who had done this to her. Because, Madison, I explained, keeping my tone perfectly steady despite the absolute rage burning in my chest. Your father did not just suddenly decide to include you in his business venture today because you magically turned 18. He has been actively using you for months. I pointed the digital laser pointer from my iPad toward the first section of the report. When I added you as an authorized user to that secondary account, I established a pristine credit profile for you. I wanted you to have a solid financial foundation, but your father saw that pristine credit profile and recognized a highly valuable, completely untapped resource. I scrolled down the digital document, revealing a massive list of deeply alarming financial activities. 6 months ago, Greg illegally obtained your social security number, I stated flatly, turning my cold gaze back to my ex-husband, who was now physically shaking. He forged your digital signature and began applying for massive unsecured personal loans. But he did not go to a traditional bank, because traditional banks rigorously verify identities and require physical presence. He went to the dark web. He went to unregulated, predatory lending platforms and highly dangerous private syndicates. Madison let out a sharp gasp, covering her mouth with her trembling hands. The television screen displayed a terrifying string of red numbers. There were 5 separate loans listed, each one carrying an absolutely astronomical interest rate. The total outstanding principal balance was staggering: $500,000. Every single penny of that dangerous, crushing debt was legally attached to Madison and her stolen identity. You did not want her $1.2 million wire transfer to fund a tech startup. Greg, I continued, mercilessly driving the final nail into his coffin. You did not need server space or liquidity pools. You desperately needed ransom money. You borrowed $500,000 from extremely violent people to seamlessly fund your lavish lifestyle and keep your fake entrepreneurial facade alive. And when those dangerous people finally came knocking on your front door, threatening to aggressively collect their payments, you panicked. You realized the absolute only way to save your own pathetic life was to ruthlessly sacrifice your teenage daughter. He was going to use your transfer to instantly pay off his dangerous creditors. Madison, I told her directly, making sure she fundamentally understood the full horrific scope of his betrayal. He used your 18th birthday as the perfect execution date because the banking algorithms would not automatically block a legal adult initiating a wire transfer. He was going to completely wipe out my life savings, clear his own illegal debts, and walk away, leaving you entirely responsible for paying back dangerous loan sharks. Greg tried to speak, trying to form a coherent sentence to defend his horrific actions. But his dry lips just moved silently. He was completely cornered and exposed before everyone in the bright room today. But paying off the loan sharks was only the first half of your brilliant exit strategy. Greg, I continued, refusing to let him breathe. I picked up my iPad again and swiped to the very last page of the dossier. The television screen flashed and a new document appeared. It was a digital receipt for a first-class one-way airplane ticket. The destination, printed in bold black letters across the screen, was a small island nation in the Caribbean. A nation completely famous for its strict banking secrecy laws, and more importantly, its absolute refusal to sign an extradition treaty with the United States government. Madison stared at the airplane ticket on the screen, and then slowly turned her head to look at her father. Her voice was barely a whisper when she finally spoke. A one-way ticket. She said, her eyes wide with a horrific realization. You were leaving. You were going to take the money and leave me here. Greg opened his mouth and reached a hand out toward her, but he could not form a single coherent excuse. The physical evidence displayed on the massive screen behind him was completely irrefutable. I stepped out from behind my velvet armchair and walked closer to the sofa, ensuring Madison heard every single word of the ugly truth. He was never planning to build a company with you, Madison. I explained, keeping my voice steady and completely devoid of sympathy for the man standing across the room. The moment you authorized that $1.2 million wire transfer this morning, the money would have instantly bounced through his fake Delaware shell company. $500,000 would have been immediately diverted to the criminal syndicate to buy back his worthless life and cancel the violent threats against him. The remaining $700,000 would have been securely routed directly to an offshore account he opened under a false name last month. I pointed my finger directly at Greg, whose shoulders were now completely slumped in total defeat. By the time the bank flagged the massive transaction on Monday morning, he would have already been sitting comfortably on a sunny beach drinking cocktails thousands of miles out of federal jurisdiction. He would have completely vanished, leaving his entire old life behind. And do you want to know what he intended to leave you with, Madison? She looked up at me, her face pale and her eyes brimming with fresh tears. She shook her head, slightly terrified of the answer. He intended to leave you holding the bag, I stated brutally and honestly. He deliberately structured every single piece of this massive fraud around your stolen identity and your 18th birthday. When the federal investigators inevitably realized the money was gone, they would not have gone looking for him in the Caribbean. They would have come straight to this house. They would have looked at the digital signatures, the authorized user logs, and the internet protocol addresses. On paper, it would look exactly like a naive but greedy 18-year-old girl decided to rob her wealthy mother blind and funnel the cash into a fake corporate entity. I watched the color drain from her cheeks as the sheer weight of the impending legal nightmare crashed down on her shoulders. You would have been the absolute sole target of a massive federal wire fraud investigation. I continued, refusing to sugarcoat the devastating reality. You would have faced immediate arrest, aggressive interrogation, and a mandatory minimum prison sentence of at least 20 years. Your entire life, your college dreams, your future career, everything would have been permanently destroyed before it even began. And if by some miracle the federal authorities did not arrest you immediately, the loan sharks certainly would have found you. Because remember, your name is the one listed on their promissory notes. When the interest payments suddenly stopped arriving, they would have come looking for the person legally responsible for the massive debt. The room fell into an incredibly heavy, horrifying silence. The only sound was the soft hum of the air conditioning and the rapid, shallow breathing of my daughter. She was finally comprehending the monstrous magnitude of her father's absolute betrayal. He did not just try to steal my savings, he actively planned to sacrifice her freedom, her physical safety, and her entire future just to secure his own cowardly escape. He was willing to throw his own teenage daughter directly to the federal authorities and violent criminals without a single second of hesitation. Greg looked frantically around the room, desperately searching for an escape route, but he found nothing except cold, glaring eyes. He realized the absolute finality of his terrifying situation. The game was over. I smiled coldly at the truly trapped man. Madison let out a sound that I had never heard before. It was a guttural, agonizing wail of pure heartbreak that seemed to tear its way out of her chest. She collapsed forward onto the plush gray sofa, burying her face in her hands as her entire body began to shake violently. The terrifying reality of her father's absolute betrayal had finally broken through her teenage defiance, completely shattering the false idol she had worshipped for the past 6 months. She started hyperventilating, gasping for air between heavy, racking sobs. I instinctively took a step toward her, my maternal instincts screaming to comfort my child, but I forced myself to hold my ground. She needed to feel the full devastating weight of this moment so she would never again fall victim to a manipulative predator. "Dad, how could you?" she choked out, looking up at Greg with a face completely stained by tears and mascara. "You promised me we were building a legacy together. You looked me right in the eyes and promised me you would protect me. How could you just abandon me to go to prison while you ran away to an island?" Greg did not offer her a single word of comfort. He did not rush to her side or drop to his knees to beg for her forgiveness. The charming, sophisticated tech entrepreneur facade that he had so carefully maintained since he walked through my front door completely evaporated into thin air. He looked at his own sobbing daughter with absolute cold indifference. His eyes darted frantically around my expensive living room, scanning the windows, the doors, and the documents scattered across the coffee table. He was acting exactly like a trapped rat, desperately searching for a tiny crack in the walls. He realized that the luxurious web of lies he had woven was entirely destroyed. His brother-in-law Terence was uselessly slumped in a chair. His sister-in-law Rebecca was looking at him with pure murderous hatred. His daughter was entirely broken, and I was standing there holding the absolute proof of his massive federal crimes. "You stupid, ungrateful woman," Greg suddenly hissed, his voice dropping into a low, demonic growl that sent a chill down my spine. "You just could not leave well enough alone, could you, Natalie? You always had to destroy everything I tried to build. You built a criminal enterprise using our child's identity." "Greg," I shot back, keeping my posture completely rigid and unafraid. "And now you are going to pay the ultimate price for your extreme arrogance." Before I could even finish my sentence, Greg snapped. The sheer desperate panic of a man staring down a 20-year federal prison sentence completely consumed him. He let out a furious roar and lunged violently across the living room, charging directly at me. His hands were outstretched, his fingers curled into tight claws as he aimed straight for the manila folder and the silver iPad resting firmly in my grasp. He wanted to destroy the physical evidence, thinking that tearing up a few pieces of paper and breaking a tablet would magically erase the extensive digital footprint my team had already secured. Rebecca screamed, jumping back against the wall as Greg threw his entire body weight forward. Madison shrieked in absolute terror, burying her head into the couch cushions. But I did not scream, and I did not panic. I simply took one calm, deliberate step backward, sliding smoothly out of his immediate reach. Greg stumbled heavily over the edge of the thick Persian rug, crashing hard onto his hands and knees just inches away from my feet. He scrambled frantically, grasping at the scattered casino logs and the fake legal injunctions, attempting to gather them into a messy pile. His breathing was heavy and ragged, sounding like a wild animal cornered in a dark alley. "You cannot do this to me," he panted, looking up at me with wild, bloodshot eyes. I will take the documents and I will leave right now. You will never see me again, Natalie. I swear to you. Just let me walk out of that front door. I looked down at him, feeling absolutely nothing but supreme satisfaction. You are not walking anywhere, Greg, I stated softly, looking directly into his terrified eyes. And as if the universe itself was waiting for my precise cue, a distant sound suddenly pierced the quiet Saturday morning air. It started as a low wail echoing over the rolling hills of my gated community. Within seconds, the sound multiplied, growing louder and more aggressive with every passing heartbeat. It was the distinct scream of multiple emergency sirens tearing through the neighborhood. The deafening noise flooded the street outside, vibrating through the thick glass windows, sealing his fate. Intense flashing red and blue lights suddenly pierced through the massive floor-to-ceiling windows of my living room. The bright strobing colors danced across the walls and reflected off the polished hardwood floors, casting long, erratic shadows over everyone. The wailing sirens grew exponentially louder until they abruptly stopped, replaced by the heavy crunch of tires rolling over my manicured gravel driveway. Several heavy car doors slammed shut in rapid succession outside. Greg froze on the floor, his hands still clutching a few crumpled pages of the fake legal documents. He looked toward the bright windows, his face completely devoid of color. The sheer reality of the flashing lights broke whatever fragile grip he still had on his sanity. He dropped the papers entirely and scrambled to his feet, stumbling over his own expensive shoes. He did not look at Madison. He did not look at Rebecca or Terrence. He simply turned and sprinted toward the front foyer, fueled by pure, desperate adrenaline. I remained seated in my velvet armchair watching him run. Greg reached the heavy custom glass front door and violently grabbed the brushed steel handle. He yanked it backward with all of his strength, expecting the door to fly open and offer him a clear path into the neighborhood. The heavy door did not budge a single inch. He let out a frustrated grunt and yanked the handle again, pulling so hard his shoulder audibly popped. He frantically reached for the manual deadbolt switch, attempting to twist it open. "It is completely useless, Greg," I called out, my voice projecting clearly across the room. He spun around, his chest heaving as he pressed his back against the glass. "Open this door right now, Natalie," he screamed, pointing a shaking finger at me. "Open this door, or I swear I will break this glass and climb out." I slowly reached over to the polished oak coffee table and picked up my crystal wine glass. I took a calm, measured sip of the rich Cabernet, enjoying the smooth finish, before setting the glass back down. I did not raise my voice or show even a hint of alarm. My smart home security system completely engaged the secondary deadbolts the moment those police cruisers breached the front gates of the community, I explained evenly. The heavy glass behind you is reinforced and shatterproof. You are not breaking it, and you are certainly not climbing out of anything today. Greg pressed his face against the glass, peering outside. "Oh my God," he whispered, his voice cracking with absolute despair. "They are walking up the driveway. There are at least 6 officers out there." He turned back to me, his eyes wide and pleading. "Tell them it was a misunderstanding, Natalie. Please tell them we were just having a family dispute over a joint bank account. I will give you whatever you want. I will sign away my parental rights. I will never speak to Madison again. Just tell them to leave." I stared at him, feeling a profound sense of disgust. He was still trying to bargain. He was still trying to negotiate his way out of a federal crime, as if we were haggling over the price of a used car. "I handle massive financial crises for Fortune 500 companies, Greg." I stated, my tone sharp and completely unforgiving. "I systematically dismantle corporate espionage and neutralize highly coordinated threats from international adversaries. Did you really think I would just sit here and argue with you all morning without a solid backup plan? Did you honestly believe I would not forward this entire comprehensive dossier directly to the Federal Bureau of Investigation 3 days ago?" Terrence let out a loud whimper from his leather chair, finally realizing that the federal authorities were likely coming for him too. Rebecca pressed her hands over her ears, squeezing her eyes shut, as if blocking out the flashing lights would magically make the nightmare disappear. Madison remained on the sofa crying softly, but she did not look at her father anymore. She kept her eyes glued to the floor, entirely detached from the pathetic man begging by the front door. Heavy fists pounded violently against the thick glass behind Greg, making him jump forward in terror. "Open the door, police," a deep authoritative voice commanded from the front porch. "We have a federal warrant for the arrest of Greg. Open the door immediately." Greg slowly slid down the glass door until he was sitting flat on the cold marble floor. He pulled his knees up to his chest and buried his face, completely surrendering to his inevitable fate. I picked up my iPad and tapped the application icon once. The smart home system chirped brightly, unlocking the deadbolts to let the authorities inside. The heavy glass door swung open with a forceful whoosh of air. A team of heavily armed federal agents wearing dark tactical vests emblazoned with yellow letters alongside uniformed Texas State Police officers instantly flooded into my pristine foyer. Their heavy black boots pounded against the polished marble, echoing like a synchronized drumbeat of absolute justice. The sheer physical presence of the law enforcement officers completely dominated the space, pushing all the oxygen out of the room. "Stay exactly where you are and keep your hands where we can see them," a loud, booming voice commanded. Terrence panicked. The reality of his illegal gambling debts and his deep involvement in a massive federal wire fraud conspiracy suddenly overloaded his brain. Instead of complying with the clear instructions given by the heavily armed officers, he made a completely irrational decision. He leaped out of the leather accent chair, knocking it backward onto the floor, and bolted toward the sliding glass doors leading to the backyard patio. He did not even make it 3 steps. 2 state troopers lunged forward with lightning speed. "Stop resisting," one of the officers yelled, grabbing Terrence by the shoulder of his expensive tailored suit. Terrence twisted violently, trying to rip himself free from the iron grip of the law. "I am just a technical advisor," he screamed, his voice cracking with sheer terror. "I did not steal any money." The officers did not hesitate or negotiate. They expertly swept his legs out from under him and slammed him face first onto the cold, hard marble floor. The sickening thud of his impact echoed through the living room, followed instantly by the sharp metallic clicking of heavy steel handcuffs ratcheting tightly around his wrists. Rebecca shrieked, covering her mouth with both hands as she watched her husband securely pinned to the ground, completely humiliated and exposed as a common criminal. Seeing Terrence forcefully taken down finally snapped Greg out of his frozen state of despair. He slowly pushed himself off the floor, attempting to salvage whatever tiny shred of dignity he had left. He frantically brushed the imaginary dust off his expensive navy blazer and smoothed down his perfectly styled hair. He immediately shifted back into his fake wealthy businessman persona, desperately hoping his charm could manipulate the federal authorities the exact same way he manipulated naive investors. He squared his shoulders and walked cautiously toward the lead detective, a tall, intimidating man holding a thick black folder. "Officer, there is absolutely no need for this aggressive display of force," Greg said, projecting a calm, sophisticated tone that made my stomach churn with disgust. "I am a prominent technology entrepreneur in this city. This entire situation is nothing but a highly emotional domestic misunderstanding. My ex-wife is simply upset over a minor civil dispute regarding our daughter's college fund and a temporary business loan. If you just give me 5 minutes to speak with my high-powered corporate attorneys, we can clear this entire mess up without wasting any more of your valuable time." The lead detective did not even blink once at the absolutely pathetic performance. He looked Greg up and down with an expression of pure professional contempt. He did not even ask for Greg's side of the story or apologize for the interruption. "Are you Greg?" he asked, his voice low and incredibly stern. "Yes, I am." Greg smiled weakly, trying to maintain eye contact. "But like I just explained to you, this is just a family matter." The detective stepped forward, completely invading Greg's personal space. He opened the thick black folder and pulled out a freshly printed legal document. "This is not a family court dispute," the detective stated flatly, holding the paper up so Greg could clearly see the official federal seal stamped at the top. "This is a federal arrest warrant issued directly by the United States District Court. We have thoroughly reviewed the extremely comprehensive digital evidence carefully provided by the highly respected crisis management firm detailing your extensive financial crimes. You are not a prominent businessman. You are a highly desperate suspect in a massive international wire fraud investigation." The fake smile completely vanished from Greg's face, instantly replaced by absolute sheer panic. "But I did not even get the money yet," he stammered foolishly, confirming his own extreme guilt right in front of the federal agents. "You cannot arrest me for a bank transfer that never actually happened." The detective signaled to a nearby federal agent who aggressively grabbed Greg by the arms and spun him around. "Attempting to commit wire fraud and identity theft is more than enough to put you away for a very long time," the detective replied coldly. "You are completely finished here playing these ridiculous childish games with the justice system." The federal agent did not wait for Greg to formulate another pathetic excuse. He grabbed Greg by the shoulder and forcefully spun him around, pressing him against the heavy glass of the front door. Greg let out a sharp gasp of pain as his cheek smashed against the cold pane. The agent quickly pulled his arms behind his back, and the distinct metallic click of heavy handcuffs echoed sharply through the room. "Greg, you have the right to remain silent." The lead detective began, his voice projecting clearly over the heavy breathing of the captured men. "Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. You have the right to an attorney. If you cannot afford an attorney, one will be provided for you. Do you understand these rights as I have read them to you?" Greg did not answer. He just stared blankly at the marble floor, his chest heaving rapidly. The detective stepped closer, invading his field of vision. "I asked if you understand your rights, Greg. You are being formally charged with felony identity theft and attempted federal wire fraud. Because these crimes involve crossing state lines and utilizing federal banking systems, you are facing a mandatory minimum sentence in a federal penitentiary. There is no early parole in the federal system. You are going away for a very long time." The crushing reality of those words finally broke through his thick wall of delusion. The charming, confident facade completely melted away, leaving nothing behind but a terrified, hollow shell of a man. His knees buckled, and he slumped heavily against the glass door. He began to sob uncontrollably. It was not a quiet, dignified cry. It was a loud, pathetic wailing that filled the entire foyer. He sounded exactly like a frightened child, realizing that nobody was coming to save him from the dark. Meanwhile, the two Texas state police officers hauled Terrence off the floor. His expensive tailored suit was now wrinkled and covered in dust from the rug. His nose was bleeding slightly from where it had hit the marble tiles during his violent takedown. He looked absolutely miserable. As they dragged him up into a standing position, another federal agent stepped in front of him, holding a small black notebook. "Terrence, you are also under arrest," the agent stated firmly. "You are being charged as a primary accessory to federal wire fraud, and you are facing multiple counts of international money laundering related to illegal offshore gambling syndicates." Terrence immediately burst into fresh, hysterical tears. His legs gave out completely, forcing the two officers to hold him up by his armpits just to keep him from collapsing back onto the floor. "I did not launder anything," Terrence wailed, his voice incredibly high-pitched and desperate. "I just lost some money playing cards. You cannot put me in federal prison for playing cards. My wife has money. She can pay the fines. Just let me talk to my wife." He twisted his head around, frantically searching the living room until his eyes locked onto Rebecca. "Rebecca, please tell them," he begged, his face streaked with tears and blood. "Tell them we can pay for a lawyer. Tell them you will bail me out. We are building a luxury real estate portfolio, remember? We are a team. We are a family." I watched this entire pathetic display from the comfort of my velvet armchair. Just an hour ago, these two men had confidently marched into my beautiful home, acting like absolute masters of the universe. They had aggressively demanded my life savings and viciously threatened to destroy my highly successful business. They had treated me like a foolish, emotional woman who could be easily bullied into submission. They had used my teenage daughter as a disposable pawn in their disgusting criminal game. Now they were both reduced to a pair of weeping, completely broken cowards. Greg was physically shaking so hard that the heavy handcuffs rattled noisily against the thick glass of the front door. Terrence was openly hyperventilating while begging for financial salvation from the exact same woman he had secretly bankrupted. The sheer contrast between their previous extreme arrogance and their current absolute devastation was incredibly satisfying to witness. The lead detective signaled to his armed team. "Get them both out of my sight," he commanded sharply. The officers firmly gripped the two sobbing men and began forcibly marching them toward the front porch. Greg dragged his feet across the marble floor, leaving long scuff marks behind his expensive designer shoes. He looked back at me one last time, his face completely drenched in bitter tears. He opened his mouth trying to speak, but nothing came out. He was finally out of lies and out of time. He was finally out of lies and out of time. The heavy glass door slammed shut behind the federal agents, echoing through the sudden devastating silence of my foyer. Through the large front windows, I watched the officers aggressively shove Greg and Terrence into the back seats of separate unmarked vehicles. The flashing red and blue lights slowly faded as the convoy of law enforcement cruisers turned around and rolled down the long gravel driveway, disappearing past the high iron gates of my secure community. The immediate threat was completely neutralized, but the catastrophic emotional wreckage remained scattered all over my living room floor. Rebecca stared blankly at the empty space by the front door, where her husband had just been violently tackled and handcuffed. Her perfectly styled blonde hair was now completely disheveled, and her expensive designer makeup was running down her pale cheeks in thick dark streaks. The sheer magnitude of her sudden horrific reality was finally crashing down upon her shoulders. She was no longer the wealthy, arrogant wife of a highly successful tech investor. She was totally bankrupt. Her luxury real estate portfolio was a complete fantasy. Her massive home equity was completely gone, and her husband was currently on his way to a federal detention center facing decades behind bars. Her breathing grew rapidly shallow and erratic. She slowly turned her head to look at me sitting comfortably in my velvet armchair. The smug superiority she had proudly worn like a crown for her entire adult life had completely vanished. Suddenly, her knees buckled. Rebecca collapsed onto the expensive Persian rug, dropping directly to her hands and knees. She did not attempt to stand back up. Instead, she began to frantically crawl across the hardwood floor toward me, her designer handbag abandoned and forgotten near the sofa. "Natalie, please," she begged, her voice cracking into a pathetic, high-pitched whine. "Please, you have to stop them. You have to call the police right now and tell them this was all just a massive misunderstanding. Tell them Terrence was just confused about the banking paperwork. You know the police chief in this city, do you not? You handle crisis management for local politicians. You can make one phone call and make all of this just disappear." I looked down at my older sister, feeling absolutely no sympathy for the woman kneeling on my floor. I did not move a single muscle. I did not reach out to comfort her. "You want me to call the Federal Bureau of Investigation and casually tell them to release a man who actively conspired to steal my life savings?" "Rebecca," I asked, my tone completely flat and emotionless. "You want me to commit perjury and obstruction of justice to save a degenerate gambler who secretly bankrupted you?" Rebecca grabbed the edge of my velvet armchair, her fingers digging desperately into the soft fabric. "But we are family, Natalie!" she sobbed violently, her tears soaking into the upholstery. "We are sisters! You cannot just let them lock my husband in a federal prison. He is not a hardened criminal. He just made a few incredibly stupid mistakes because he was under so much financial pressure. He was just trying to provide a beautiful life for me. You cannot do this to our family. Mom and Dad will be absolutely devastated when they find out what you have done. They will never ever forgive you for sending their favorite son-in-law to a terrifying federal penitentiary. I stared deeply into her frantic, bloodshot eyes, completely fascinated by her endless capacity for severe delusion. Even now, completely ruined and kneeling on the floor, she was still instinctively trying to use our toxic parents as an emotional weapon against me. She actually believed the sacred bond of blood somehow excused international money laundering and felony identity theft. You have millions of dollars sitting safely in your bank accounts, Natalie, she pleaded frantically, transitioning from guilt trips to outright begging. You stopped the wire transfer, so your money is completely fine. Please just hire the best defense lawyers in the state for Terrence. You can pay off his underground casino debts before the cartel comes looking for me. I have absolutely nothing left, Natalie. Terrence took everything we had. The bank is going to foreclose on my house next month, and I do not even have enough cash to buy groceries. You have to help me fix this terrible mess, because sisters are supposed to fiercely protect each other no matter what happens. She looked up at me with wide, desperate eyes, waiting for me to magically wave my hand and erase the devastating consequences of her own blinding arrogance. She expected me to rescue her simply because we shared the same last name. I slowly pushed myself up from the comfortable depths of my velvet armchair and stood towering over my kneeling sister. I looked down at her tear-stained face and her trembling hands clutching the expensive fabric of my chair. I felt a strange sense of absolute closure wash over me. For 18 years, I had carried the heavy burden of my family's rejection. I had allowed their cruel words and their constant dismissals to dictate my self-worth. But in this exact moment, looking at the pathetic reality of the golden child, I realized I was finally completely free. I stepped closer to her, forcing her to tilt her head all the way back just to meet my cold gaze. You honestly expect me to write a massive check to save your husband, Rebecca? I asked, my voice dropping into a quiet, deadly whisper. You want me to dip into the wealth I built with my own two bare hands to rescue a man who actively plotted to send my teenage daughter to federal prison? You think that because we share DNA, I am somehow legally and morally obligated to catch you when you fall from the ridiculous pedestal you built for yourself? Rebecca nodded frantically, her eyes wide and desperate. Yes, Natalie, she sobbed violently. We are supposed to help each other. We are blood. It is what families do when things go completely wrong. I let out a harsh, bitter laugh that echoed sharply against the high ceilings of my living room. That is a truly fascinating perspective on family dynamics, Rebecca, I replied, never breaking eye contact. Let us take a quick trip down memory lane, shall we? Let us travel back 18 years ago to the night our parents discovered I was 16 and pregnant with Madison. Do you remember that specific night, Rebecca? Because I remember every single agonizing second of it. I remember our father violently throwing my clothes into cheap black garbage bags. I remember our mother screaming that I was a disgusting failure who had permanently ruined the pristine family reputation. Rebecca swallowed hard, shaking her head slightly, as if trying to physically deny the memory. That was a long time ago, Natalie, she whispered weakly. We were just kids. You were a teenager, yes, I corrected her, my tone turning incredibly sharp. But you knew exactly what you were doing. When I was standing on the cold front porch, holding two plastic garbage bags containing everything I owned in the entire world, I looked at you. I begged you to talk to them. I begged you to let me sleep on the floor of your bedroom, just for one night, so I would not have to sleep on the bus bench in the freezing rain. Do you remember what you said to me as you stood in the warm, brightly lit hallway? Rebecca squeezed her eyes tightly shut, letting out a soft, agonizing whimper. Please do not do this, she pleaded. I leaned down until my face was only inches away from hers, ensuring my words pierced directly through her soul. I am going to remind you exactly what you said to your desperate, terrified, pregnant sister, I whispered fiercely. You looked me right in the eyes, you smiled your perfect golden child smile, And you said choices have consequences. Do not let the door hit you on the way out. I stood back up, straightening my posture and crossing my arms firmly across my chest. You made your choices, Rebecca, I stated coldly. You chose to marry a degenerate gambler because he bought you flashy designer bags and expensive dinners. You chose to aggressively defend him when he continuously insulted my career. You chose to blindly support a criminal conspiracy that targeted my life savings. And now you are facing the absolute consequences of those incredibly arrogant choices. I will not give you a single dime of my money. I will not make a single phone call to help your husband. You are entirely on your own. Rebecca stared at me, her mouth hanging open in pure stunned silence. The absolute finality in my voice completely shattered whatever tiny shred of hope she had left clinging to her chest. She realized I was completely unbreakable. I turned my head toward the foyer where one Texas state police officer had remained standing near the open doorway, quietly observing the intense interaction. Officer, I called out, my voice clear and authoritative. This woman is no longer welcome inside my home. She is completely ignoring my explicit boundaries and causing a severe emotional disturbance. I am officially asking you to escort her off my private property immediately for trespassing. The officer stepped forward and grabbed her arm. Rebecca sobbed and finally walked away. The officer stepped forward and grabbed her arm. Rebecca sobbed and finally walked away. I followed them slowly out onto the wide stone porch to watch her leave, ensuring she was entirely removed from my property. But as I stepped through the heavy glass doorway, the bright Texas morning sun temporarily blinded me. When my eyes finally adjusted to the glaring light, I witnessed a scene that perfectly encapsulated the absolute destruction of their pathetic lives. The unmarked law enforcement vehicles had not actually left my secure community yet. The initial cruisers had merely pulled forward down my long gravel driveway to stage the prisoners before transport. Greg and Terrence were currently standing beside the trunks of two separate police vehicles, completely exposed to the entire neighborhood. My exclusive gated community is usually a sanctuary of absolute privacy and quiet discretion. The residents are high-profile executives, professional athletes, and wealthy socialites who deeply value their personal space. But nothing attracts a massive crowd quite like a spectacular federal raid on a Saturday morning. The deafening sirens and flashing lights had drawn every single neighbor out of their multi-million-dollar mansions. They were standing on their perfectly manicured lawns wearing their expensive weekend loungewear and holding their high-end smartphones perfectly level to record the entire humiliating spectacle. I leaned against the thick stone pillar of my front porch and watched the ultimate public execution of a fake empire. Greg was forcefully shoved against the side of a black sports utility vehicle so an agent could thoroughly search his pockets. The brilliant, charming tech entrepreneur who had spent the last 6 months aggressively networking at exclusive country clubs and pitching his fake startup to anyone who would listen was now the star of a viral neighborhood scandal. He tried to hide his face, turning his head away from the glaring cameras, but it was completely useless. The wealthy investors he had desperately tried to court, the country club members he had lied to, and the elite social circles he had tried to infiltrate were all currently watching him being treated like a common street criminal. Every single high-definition video being recorded right now would be instantly shared across private group chats and local social media networks before noon. His fake reputation was not just damaged, it was publicly and permanently incinerated. Nobody would ever trust him again. He would never secure another meeting pitch, another fake business, or manipulate another innocent investor. The carefully constructed illusion of Greg the visionary billionaire was dead forever. He let out a loud groan of pure humiliation as a federal agent aggressively pushed his head down and shoved him into the cramped back seat of the cruiser, slamming the heavy metal door shut behind him. Terrence was receiving the exact same brutal treatment just a few feet away. He was openly weeping, loudly begging the stoic state troopers to cover his face with his jacket. He knew that his own professional network, his fake cryptocurrency trading groups, and his underground gambling associates would undoubtedly see this humiliating footage. His loud, pathetic cries echoed clearly across the manicured lawns, providing the perfect dramatic audio for the neighbors recording the event. They forcefully deposited him into the second law enforcement vehicle, locking him away in the dark, cramped space. Then there was Rebecca. The officer escorted her down the long driveway, right past the crowd of staring neighbors. She had spent the last 3 years aggressively bragging to these exact same wealthy women about her massive real estate portfolio and her brilliant husband. She had constantly paraded her designer clothes and her luxury vehicles up and down this very street, acting as if she were royalty. Now she was doing the ultimate walk of shame. She tried to cover her tear-stained face with her expensive handbag, but the damage was already done. She was publicly exposed as the broke, desperate wife of a convicted felon. She stumbled down the street completely alone with absolutely nowhere to go and no money to call a premium ride service. The lead detective finally gave the loud command to move out. The engines of the heavy police cruisers roared to life, breaking the tense silence of the neighborhood. The convoy slowly rolled forward, exiting my property and turning down the main boulevard of the gated community. The neighbors continued recording until the very last flashing taillight completely disappeared around the corner. Then they slowly lowered their phones, whispering excitedly to one another as they retreated back into their beautiful homes. The spectacular show was officially over. The massive federal threat against my family and my hard-earned assets was entirely neutralized. I took one last deep breath of the fresh morning air, feeling the warm Texas sun. I took one last deep breath of the fresh morning air, feeling the warm Texas sun on my face before turning my back on the empty street. I grabbed the heavy brushed steel handle of my custom glass door, pulling it shut with a solid, definitive click. The moment the thick glass sealed into its frame, the entire house fell into an absolute dead silence. The screaming, the threats, the wailing sirens, and the chaotic footsteps of federal agents were completely gone. The profound quiet that replaced the chaos was almost deafening in its intensity. My pristine luxury home, which had just served as ground zero for a massive federal takedown, felt incredibly empty. I stood alone in the grand marble foyer for a long moment, simply listening to the gentle hum of the central air conditioning system. The expensive Persian rug in the living room was still violently kicked out of place. The fake legal injunctions and highly classified forensic documents were still scattered haphazardly across the polished oak coffee table. 2 chairs were knocked completely over, and a single crystal wine glass sat untouched next to my silver iPad. But the most prominent sound in the entire house was not the hum of the appliances. It was the sound of my 18-year-old daughter completely breaking down. I slowly walked down the short flight of stairs, descending into the sunken living room. Madison was curled tightly into a small ball on the far corner of the plush gray sofa. Her knees were pulled sharply up to her chest, and she had her arms wrapped securely around her legs, as if trying to hold her shattering body together. She was sobbing uncontrollably, her thin shoulders shaking violently with every agonizing breath she took. The defiant, confident young woman who had aggressively pounded on my front door just a few short hours ago was completely gone. In her place was a terrified, heartbroken child who had just watched her entire worldview collapse into ashes. I stopped walking when I reached the edge of the glass coffee table, intentionally keeping a small physical distance between us. I did not immediately rush forward to wrap my arms around her. I did not stroke her hair or whisper soft, comforting platitudes into her ear. That is not how a crisis is successfully managed, and that is certainly not how deep, permanent lessons are learned. I simply stood there maintaining my calm, unyielding presence, allowing her to thoroughly process the terrifying reality of what transpired. "Mom, I am so sorry." Madison suddenly choked out her voice, barely recognizable through the thick, heavy tears. She squeezed her eyes tightly shut, unable to even look at my face. "I am so incredibly sorry. I did not know. I swear I had absolutely no idea he was doing those terrible things." He promised me he was building a legacy for us. He looked right at me and told me he loved me. How could he just leave me to go to jail? How could he do that to his own daughter? She buried her face deep into her knees, her wails echoing loudly against the high ceilings. I listened to her desperate apologies, feeling the sharp, painful sting of maternal empathy, but I kept my posture completely rigid. You almost threw away my entire life savings, Madison. I said, my voice soft but incredibly firm, carrying clearly through the quiet room. You bypassed secure administrative firewalls and attempted to secretly wire $1 million to a man you have only known for 6 months. You allowed him to manipulate your emotions and weaponize your anger against the one person who has fiercely protected you since you were born. I know, Madison sobbed violently, her fingernails digging deeply into the fabric of her jeans. I was so incredibly stupid. I just wanted a father, Mom. I just wanted him to be proud of me and treat me like an equal. He made me feel so important and so smart. I thought you were just being controlling because you hated him. I never thought he would actually use my social security number to steal money from criminals. I could have gone to federal prison today. I could have lost absolutely everything because I trusted the wrong person. She slowly lifted her head, finally forcing herself to look directly at me. Her face was completely red and swollen, her mascara running down her cheeks in dark, messy rivers. "Please forgive me, Mom," she pleaded, her voice cracking with desperation. "Please do not hate me for this. I will do whatever it takes to fix this mess. Just please tell me you do not hate me." I stared at my weeping daughter, watching the painful death of her childhood innocence. I did not cross the space between us to pull her into a tight embrace. As much as every single maternal instinct inside my body screamed at me to wrap my arms around her and promise her that everything was going to be perfectly fine, I knew I could not do that. Coddling her in this exact moment would only reinforce the dangerous idea that she could make catastrophic, life-altering decisions and simply cry her way out of the severe consequences. She had just spent the last 6 months treating me with absolute contempt because she believed I was a bitter enemy standing in the way of her brilliant success. She needed to feel the sharp, biting sting of reality. I walked over to the velvet armchair and sat back down, resting my hands calmly in my lap. "I love you, Madison," I said, my voice steady and unwavering in the quiet room. "I will always love you more than anyone else in this entire world. But love and trust are two completely different things. You shattered my trust today. You looked me right in the eyes and called me a soulless spin doctor. You threw away 18 years of my love and sacrifice for a man who abandoned you when you were just a baby. You let his empty promises of sudden wealth completely blind you to his incredibly obvious manipulations." Madison sniffled loudly, wiping her nose with the back of her trembling hand. "I know," she whispered, looking down at the floor. "I will do whatever you say, Mom. I will delete all of his contact information. I will never speak to him or Uncle Terrence again. Just please do not kick me out of the house. I have absolutely nowhere else to go." "I am not going to kick you out onto the street," I replied, softening my tone, just a fraction. "This is your home and you are always safe here. But you are officially an adult today, Madison. And being an adult means taking absolute accountability for your own actions. You do not get a free ride out of this massive disaster. Your father severely destroyed your credit profile. He took out $500,000 in high-interest loans using your social security number. The federal authorities might understand that you were manipulated, but those predatory lenders absolutely will not care. They are going to come looking for their money, and they are going to legally come after you." Her eyes widened in fresh panic as the terrifying financial reality set back in. "But I do not have any money," she cried out, her voice pitching higher. "How am I supposed to pay back $500,000 to loan sharks? I am only 18 years old. I am supposed to start college in the fall." "You are not going to pay the loan sharks," I corrected her firmly. "You are going to hire a very aggressive team of specialized defense attorneys to formally contest every single fraudulent charge attached to your identity. You are going to file official police reports for identity theft against your own father, and you are going to spend the next several months fighting a brutal uphill legal battle to completely clear your name and restore your financial standing. And you are going to pay for every single hour of those expensive legal fees completely by yourself. Madison stared at me in absolute shock. How she asked, her voice trembling, "How can I possibly afford lawyers like that?" "Because starting on Monday morning, you are going to be a full-time employee at my public relations firm," I stated clearly, leaving absolutely no room for negotiation or argument. "But you are not getting a fancy corner office, and you are certainly not getting a massive corporate salary. You are going to work in the mailroom. You are going to sort physical letters. You are going to fetch coffee for the junior account executives, and you are going to clean out the storage closets. You will work 40 hours a week, and every single paycheck you earn will go directly into a heavily monitored escrow account used strictly to pay your legal team. There will be no shopping sprees, no weekend vacations, and no expensive designer sneakers until your credit is completely clear." She looked at me, her face pale and exhausted. The glamorous illusion of becoming a teenage startup billionaire had been entirely replaced by the grueling reality of minimum wage corporate labor. But she did not argue. She did not scream or throw another tantrum. She simply wiped the last remaining tears from her swollen eyes and slowly nodded her head. "Okay, Mom," she whispered, her voice finally sounding grounded and remarkably mature. "I will do it." Exactly 6 months have passed since that terrifying Saturday morning when my quiet foyer transformed into the epicenter of a massive federal raid. The legal system is notoriously slow, but when you hand federal prosecutors a perfectly organized, completely irrefutable dossier of evidence, they tend to move with terrifying efficiency. Greg did not even try to take his case to a long, drawn-out trial. His high-powered corporate attorneys quickly realized he was completely indefensible and advised him to accept his fate. Last Tuesday, I sat quietly in the back row of a heavy oak-paneled federal courtroom in downtown Austin and watched the judge drop the final hammer. Greg was officially sentenced to 15 consecutive years in a maximum security federal penitentiary without the possibility of early parole. The judge cited his predatory use of his own teenage daughter's identity as an incredibly aggravating factor in the sentencing. When the heavy wooden gavel struck the block, Greg did not look back at the gallery. He simply lowered his head and allowed the armed bailiffs to lead him away, his designer suits permanently traded in for a bright orange jumpsuit. He will be almost 50 years old before he ever sees the outside of a prison wall again. Terrence faced an equally brutal reality check, but he proved to be completely lacking in any kind of loyalty. The moment the federal interrogators offered him a slight reduction in charges, he instantly turned on Greg. He spilled every single detail of their fraudulent cryptocurrency startup and handed over the hidden ledgers documenting his massive illegal gambling losses. Because of his extensive cooperation, he secured a plea deal. He was sentenced to 7 years in federal custody for international money laundering and accessory to wire fraud. His desperate attempts to paint himself as a naive technical advisor completely failed. He is currently serving his time at a low-security facility in Louisiana, completely cut off from the flashy digital world he once pretended to conquer. Rebecca unfortunately learned that the criminal justice system is not the only ruthless entity in the federal government. When the authorities unraveled Terrence's massive gambling debts, the Internal Revenue Service immediately stepped in to investigate their joint financial filings. They discovered years of unreported offshore casino transfers and blatant tax evasion. The government instantly placed a massive unpayable tax lien on her supposedly luxurious real estate portfolio. Her beautiful custom home was seized and auctioned off by the bank to cover the remaining equity loans. Today, the woman who used to aggressively mock my career choices and brag about her effortless wealth is living in a tiny, cramped apartment on the outskirts of the city. She works 40 hours a week as a checkout cashier at a local discount grocery store, just to slowly chip away at the crushing IRS penalties Terrence left behind. Every time I drive past that shopping plaza, I think about her cruel words on my front porch. She made her toxic choices, and now she is manually scanning barcodes to pay for them. As for Madison, her journey over the past 6 months has been the most profound transformation of all. She kept her promise to me. She did not complain when her alarm clock went off at 5 in the morning on that first Monday. She put on a pair of sensible flat shoes and walked into the mailroom of my public relations firm. She spent her entire summer aggressively sorting heavy packages, delivering physical files across the massive office, and silently taking coffee orders for junior executives who were only a few years older than her. Every single Friday afternoon, she took her minimum wage paycheck and directly deposited it into the escrow account managed by her legal defense team. The lawyers have been incredibly successful aggressively negotiating with the predatory lending platforms and actively removing the fraudulent inquiries from her credit report. It is a slow, grueling process, but she is actually doing it. I watch her from the glass walls of my corner office, and I see an entirely different young woman. The arrogant, entitled teenager who demanded bridge capital for a fake tech company is completely gone. In her place is a highly resilient, hardworking adult who finally understands the true value of a dollar and the extreme danger of trusting the wrong people. We still have a long way to go to completely repair our relationship. There are still quiet moments when she looks incredibly sad, grieving the father she thought she had. But we eat dinner together every night now, without the constant shadow of his manipulation hanging over our heads. She is slowly earning back my deep trust, one stamped envelope and sorted file at a time, completely rebuilding her bright future securely. I step out onto my front porch right now and take a deep breath of the warm evening air. The sun is just beginning to set over the rolling hills of Austin, casting a brilliant golden glow across the quiet neighborhood. It is peaceful here. The manicured lawns are perfectly still, and the only sound is the gentle rustle of the wind through the oak trees. I lean against the thick stone pillar, the exact same spot where I stood 6 months ago, watching the federal authorities drag my treacherous ex-husband and my deceptive brother-in-law away in heavy steel handcuffs. The contrast between that morning of absolute chaos and this evening of profound tranquility is entirely striking. It serves as a beautiful daily reminder of exactly what I fought so hard to fiercely protect. For a very long time, I allowed society to dictate my understanding of family. We are constantly told from a very young age that blood is thicker than water and that we must unconditionally forgive the people who share our genetics. We are heavily conditioned to believe that setting firm boundaries with our relatives is somehow selfish or cruel. But I am here to tell you that family is absolutely never a valid excuse for abuse. Sharing a last name or a biological connection does not grant anyone a free pass to manipulate your emotions, drain your bank accounts, or destroy your hard-earned stability. Protecting your peace and your financial assets is not an act of malice or bitter revenge. It is the absolute highest form of self-love. You do not owe your success to the people who abandoned you when you were struggling. You do not owe your life savings to the relatives who constantly belittle your choices. When Greg marched up to my front door demanding my money, he expected me to fold under the immense pressure of his fake authority. When my sister Rebecca kneeled on my living room floor begging for a financial bailout, she expected my guilt to completely override my logic. They both fundamentally misunderstood the immense strength of a woman who built her own empire from absolute scratch. I refused to be their sacrificial lamb. I chose to aggressively defend my territory, and in doing so, I saved my daughter from a lifetime of catastrophic ruin. It was an incredibly painful process. Watching my own family completely shatter was not a joyful experience, but it was an entirely necessary one. Sometimes you have to ruthlessly prune the dead branches of your family tree so the healthy ones can actually survive and thrive. Madison and I are finally thriving. The toxic shadows that haunted our relationship are permanently gone, replaced by genuine respect and honest communication. If you are watching this video and feeling completely overwhelmed by toxic family members who constantly demand more than they ever give, I want you to listen to me very carefully. You are allowed to firmly say no. You are allowed to securely lock your doors, freeze your bank accounts, and walk entirely away from the people who intentionally cause you harm. Your worth is not determined by how much abuse you can silently endure for the sake of keeping the peace. Your true worth is defined by your ability to fiercely protect your own well-being. Every single step you take toward independence is a massive victory over the manipulative forces trying to hold you firmly down. Do not ever let anyone convince you that protecting your assets makes you a bad person. The world is full of individuals who will take advantage of your kindness if you do not actively establish an impenetrable wall around your life. You have the absolute right to live freely without constant fear, without manipulation, and without financial abuse dragging you backward into a very cold, dark, and dangerous place. Have you ever had to establish ruthless boundaries with family members who felt entirely entitled to your money or your energy? Have you ever had to walk away from a toxic dynamic to save yourself? I would love to hear your personal stories of resilience and courage in the comments section down below. Reading your experiences helps all of us realize that we are never completely alone in these difficult battles. If this story resonated with your own life, please hit the like button and subscribe to my channel for more honest conversations about navigating difficult relationships and building absolute independence. Share this video with someone who might desperately need a reminder that it is perfectly acceptable to fiercely protect their peace. Thank you so much for joining me on this incredible journey of healing and justice. Remember that true family will never ask you to compromise your safety or your sanity. The story of Natalie and her incredibly toxic family serves as a powerful masterclass. In one undeniable truth-sharing DNA does not grant anyone a free pass to manipulate or abuse you. For generations, society has weaponized the concept of family, heavily conditioning us to believe that blood is thicker than water and that we must unconditionally forgive our relatives no matter how deeply they betray our trust. However, as this dramatic saga clearly proves, protecting your peace, your assets, and your sanity is not an act of bitter revenge. It is the absolute highest form of self-love. When faced with staggering betrayal from a manipulative ex-husband, weaponizing their teenage daughter to a sister demanding a financial bailout for her criminal husband, Natalie did not crumble under the heavy weight of family guilt. She stood her ground. The hardest lesson to learn in life is that sometimes the people who are supposed to love and protect you are the exact same people you must fiercely protect yourself against. We are often taught that setting boundaries is selfish or cruel, but Natalie's unyielding stance demonstrates that boundaries are actually the fundamental core of survival. By refusing to rescue those who actively tried to destroy her, she not only saved her own empire, but also taught her daughter a priceless lesson in accountability. Healing begins the moment you stop setting yourself on fire just to keep toxic people warm. You do not owe your hard-earned success, your mental health, or your life savings to relatives who only view you as a disposable resource. True family is built on a foundation of mutual respect, not parasitic entitlement. Take a hard look at the relationships draining your energy today, and dare to draw an unbreakable line in the sand to fiercely protect your own future.